All right. So tonight we're going to talk about universal basic income. I'm excited to talk about this. I don't know if you remember, Raul, but we talked about this in person a while ago.
Yeah.
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 But yeah, I think it's a super interesting topic, and it might become a very important topic, and it has become more relevant in after the pandemic started because a lot of people lost their jobs, and I think even they even started doing some pilot programs in some places. And Andrew Yang might become mayor of New York. Who knows? So he might institute some sort of pilot program over there. In any case, universal basic income is basically the very simply the idea that you get free money from the government, that everybody gets a certain amount of money every month or every year that covers, and there are two versions. Partial universal basic income, you would get just some money to help out with your expenses, and a more comprehensive universal basic income, you'd get enough money basically to live off of that, or at least to pay for a good part of your expenses. So what are your initial thoughts about universal basic income, guys?
I like it. I, I remember the first time I heard those 2013, and yeah, I guess they already tried some experiments in northern European countries like Norway and Sweden,
Finland, I think. Yeah.
and
Finland.
Finland, I
yeah.
believe it was.
Yeah, I was very excited about it since I didn't spend much money back then, and I didn't worry too much also about how to get money. But this idea that everybody is going to get a certain amount of money to uh, pay for like whatever basic needs, it's very exciting. So you don't need to work, you don't need to do anything. You may do some art and all sorts of creativity. But the question arises, like, will people actually do anything if they have enough money? Like, why bother yourself with some creative work when you just may sit and play video games, or just watch TV shows all the time?
Yeah, and that's really one of the big, if not the biggest, counter arguments to universal basic income, or one of its biggest criticisms, is that exactly what you said, that maybe people, if they have this money coming in, they just won't bother to work at all.
As I understand it, I watched several videos and read some articles in the past week, and then I got on Facebook today. I saw you had posted a couple of videos, neither one of which I watched.
It's okay. It was
I watched
minute.
part of one, but my understanding is that, well, first let me tell you what I think, which is so that you know where to start.
Sure.
I think that it is something that is going to happen. I don't know when, but in my view, it's inevitable. I don't know if it's going to happen in 10 years or 20 years, or what final form it will take, but I do worry about some things. I worry not about the income, but the outgo. Where does the money come from? And one discussion that I listened to talked about the dollars that we spend on welfare and social programs now, we won't spend on that. And we won't spend it on bureaucracy because there is no means testing with universal basic income. And it's not intended, at least as I understand it, maybe some people do, want this, but my understanding is that generally it's not intended to be a complete replacement for everything you could ever want. Because although we live in a rich country, rich enough to do anything we want, we don't live in a country rich enough to do everything we want. And so I think that we have to a lot of the articles, and you guys may have encountered some other stuff, but a lot of the articles that I see talk about the morality of helping out somebody who's in need and putting a floor on income and I'm all right with all of that, but they don't talk about where the money comes from to my satisfaction. In other words, I think that mathematically it can be worked out that we spend X dollars on these social programs, and now we're going to spend X dollars on universal basic income. Is that enough? I don't know. And nobody's saying.
Well,
So why do you think it's inevitable? Like you said, it's inevitable and it's going to happen in 10, 15 years.
Well, I think that, well, maybe it's not inevitable. I don't even know that. So thanks, Vladimir. Now I don't know anything.
Well, I just want to point out, I think that you kind of like touched on something that I do think is interesting about the discussion, and I don't know if it clarifies anything, but one of the TED Talks I watched, the last one that I watched actually about it, it was interesting because he did, the guy that was doing the talking, he presented it in two different ways, or he said, there are two different kinds of discussions we can have. And I thought that was a good way to present the topic, or a good distinction to make, because like you said, David, there are two ways you can look at it. You can look at it from the moral perspective, and that's a completely different discussion from the other way you can look at it, which is it actually something that will help? Is it actually something that will produce results? And how can we do it? Will it work, right? So one of the perspectives is really a moral discussion that we're having, right? Either we want to have a more sort of like communal society, or we want to have a more individualistic, unrestrained capitalist society. But that's really more of a moral argument, or a moral discussion. Another discussion is, will this actually help with problems, and will it actually work, which is different, right? So I just wanted to point that out, because I do think that that's a kind of an interesting distinction to make, and it helps us think, are we talking about our morals, or are we talking about actually good governance and what works and what doesn't work?
The moral problems we have right now, it's the mathematics of it that I'm uncertain about.
All right, we'll cover the mathematics. Well, have you heard anything from Andrew Yang? Andrew Yang talks about the mathematics of it.
I've seen a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that helps is the fact that he does present, when he talks about his UBI program, or his proposal for UBI, I think he came up with a very ingenious solution. Basically, well, actually, he probably got the idea from Alaska, because Alaska actually is one of the few places in the world that actually does have a universal basic income. It's just a very small one, kind of small, and they don't call it that. But basically, every person in Alaska receives, every year, they receive an oil dividend that comes from their oil revenues, and it goes directly to the people. And they've been doing this for a number of years, and people are pretty happy about it. And Alaska is a very conservative state, but it doesn't really matter. Everybody seems to like the money that comes from that particular dividend. And Andrew Yang says, well, we should maybe peg this to a particular resource, just like oil, and his proposal but I would argue we can come up with other ways as well. But his proposal is to essentially tax the big tech companies. They're not really paying that many taxes, like Amazon, for example, or Facebook, and have them pay for well, for one thing, their fair share of taxes, but also the data that they're collecting, and they're not paying people anything. That we should start with that, and that should start.
Is that enough money?
Well, I don't know if that's enough money. That's a more complicated question.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to be like we always have the discussion. These big companies, they make money off of our data. Do they make so much money that they could like pay for a substantial chunk of UBI for? Yeah, let's even say like the Google, with all how they use our data, let's say they're making 100 billion. Okay, on an economic level, that's still just 100 billion, right? That's not enough for UBI for, I don't know, even like a tenth of the country, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
They make a lot more than that.
Or what was my number that I said?
100 billion.
No.
Or just off of people's data. I mean, Google's not, but like Google, a lot of the money they make is like the products they make, not just selling people's data, I guess. Not purely selling people's data.
The lion's share of what they make is selling data about you and me.
You think so?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
To advertising. Yeah. Okay, I looked it up. The UBI Center estimated that Yang's plan would cost 2.8 trillion a year. That's
a chunk.
Yeah, and even if it's off by 100%, that's still 1.4 trillion. So
well, yeah. It's a lot of money, but I do think that we could, I don't think we should think about, well, we should pay, like we should come up with this program that costs $1 trillion.
Yeah. No, I right now I have it will be a major reworking of the US budget, and
Exactly,
it was to say that it's a total reorientation of how we think about government spending. And so,
it would be a major reworking of our economic structure.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I think that we have to test it more.
Right.
And we have to test it for a longer period of time than it's been tested so far.
And that's not you can't think of it as basically a $2.8 trillion hit, because a lot of that will then go into consumption spending, which would stimulate the economy. So there will be some follow-on effects that would lower the net outlay or the net cost of the program. So I'm not saying it's just from the number alone. It's not something that you say, then that's totally.
Well, one of the advantages that I heard discussed was that if there is no means testing and everybody gets it, then that removes the situation where somebody is getting welfare, and if they get a job, they lose the welfare.
Yeah.
With this, if you get a job, which you would still have to do, I think, if you want to make a living, you wouldn't lose the UBI because you got a job. And so you could only add to it. You couldn't go backwards by working.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think are very positive about it, is exactly that the welfare system, the way it's unemployment benefits and some of these other benefits work, it kind of puts you in a tricky position, because if you do certain things, you might lose actually the benefits, and then you're going to be much worse off, so it puts people in kind of a difficult position. It's a precarious position because you can't just go out and get anything. It can't be like a gradual change. You got to make sure you get essentially a good job that will pay you more than what you're getting at this point, and you still want to make sure that you're going to be able to pay your bills and everything. And that really it's an incentive against improving your situation, right? In a natural way. In this case, like you're saying, everything you do is just going to be an added benefit, right? Because you're still going to get that baseline.
Right. There's no disincentive, and so it might raise U.S. productivity.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just needs to be tried out seriously to find out if it works.
One of the people that I heard talking about this was well, I've heard a couple of different scenarios. One is that this should be the universal basic income should go to everyone who's over 18. And another proposal was it should go to everyone from the time they're born. And the misgivings I have about that is I don't think it replaces income taxes or anything like that. We should still have the earned income child tax credit, thing.
Mhm.
But if every child gets money, then you open the door for people struggling to have more children that we've all got to take care of. I don't know if that happens or not, but we need to do some testing to figure it out.
Right. There is a danger of a moral hazard there, in that if there are people who decide that, oh, we're gonna have more children,
because they're worth $1,000 a month each.
right? We're gonna have more children to get more basic income. But that very thought alone, to think that way, already means that they don't really care what happens to those kids. Because if you're
that's beside the point.
if
I
you're serious
understand
about
what you're saying, and I
yeah.
agree with what you're saying, but
yeah,
to me, the bigger issue is it our government's responsibility to fund every human being, no matter how young? And does that create a problem for us? Maybe it doesn't, but I worry that it does.
Well, I think at first it's actually, I think that's kind of like a detail, right, in the implementation, because it's just one way that you kind of like need to see what works and what doesn't work. I think that's probably not an incentive that you want to give people, that they're going to get a lot of money if they have a lot of kids, just because of the sustainability of things, but also because of the fact that it's going to be an expensive program. Like if we're actually talking about implementing it, you probably want to start with, well, maybe let's skip on the kids for now, and give it to actually, people after they turn 18, they'll be able to get it if they're citizen or residents or whatever. But you don't need to get into that quagmire like right from the beginning, also because at that point a good part of the population are people under 18. So that's another way that you can actually implement the program in feasible ways, that if you cut basically everybody who's under 18, which makes sense because they have no, they're not independent. They still have people that are taking care of them. Because a big part of the idea behind the UBI is that you are providing families with a basic, their basic necessities are being met. So theoretically, you don't need to give people who are under 18 that money.
Yeah, but raising kids costs money.
I agree with you. It costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
So that's why it's kind of a complicated question.
Yeah, it is. Some proposals were limited to, I don't know, 3 children, 4 children, or whatever, like what we have now for the stimulus payments. But yes, those are details.
Yes.
Is that more interesting for me really is about like when David said that it might be inevitable, and it's really how technology and the economy breaks that will decide it really. If basically people become obsolete, not wholly, but it's just that the economy starts to run on less manpower, less labor, and so what a lot of people do if they can't find jobs that aren't there,
Well, the way
Yeah.
I view it is that right now the floor is 0, no income.
Mhm.
And the question to me is, are we wealthy enough to make it so that the floor is not 0?
Is it 0? Because we have welfare programs, right? Or we have food
That,
stamps,
that that's true, but yeah, you
but it's small. It's small.
you are correct.
Yeah, but
And I think a big question is for UBI, because $1,000 a month, it's very difficult to live on $1,000 a month. So yeah, the question is it going to, are we talking partial universal basic income or enough to live off of, even if not the most comfortably? Like if you just live off of beans and rice and you live in a super cheap apartment, or however that works. Are we talking
Yeah.
about?
That's a partial basic income proposal for the United States. Obviously, there are places where you can live with that money, but in the United States, I think that's what, if we're talking $1,000, that would be the idea. But it's a very generous partial basic income because you still can cover a lot,
right.
But it's still not. Yeah, it would be a partial certainly, because I don't think the idea is for people not to have a job.
Yeah, and if you're single, you're probably better off finding a roommate or or whatever, sharing on rent or things like that. But the thing is to keep people from extreme poverty, and I think that should be at the very least what the basic income.
So if the purpose of it is to keep people out of extreme poverty, should you give it to wealthy people?
Actually, there's another purpose besides this one, which is this advancement of technologies. And it seems that in 10, 15, 20 years, all man labor will be replaced by machines. And there's like, there will be no need to work, since all work is going to be done by machines. And then people just will get free money, not because to solve some economical problems, but because there's there will be no jobs. And this whole idea with universal basic income, it's also about preparing people to live, to learn to live without working, so to do something like, without being forced to do it by by some economical forces, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's it seems that we just replace all like there's literally like will be no jobs in like 2050. Like machines will do like for example, this autonomous vehicles will replace all drivers like in 20-30 years. And like drivers is how many people now engaged in working, like taxi drivers, like bus drivers, whatever, truck drivers. Like what are they going to do after all autonomous vehicles will took their jobs? And it's not just only about drivers, it's also in production. There's no, like, it seems that all like it gets more and more automatized, all sorts of works, and like human labor is no longer needed.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's really the urgent, not urgent as in, that's a primary maybe impetus for thinking about a universal basic income. Because people become obsolete the way horses became obsolete in the US economy or in any developed economy, developed nation's economy, then there's a major problem in our hands about, first of all, how to sustain demand that would keep the economy going. If people don't have jobs and they don't have incomes, then who's going to buy all that stuff? And then also just for people's well-being.
I think that's certainly one of the reasons why universal basic income is interesting. I wouldn't say it's the
Right.
only reason, right?
Yeah,
Because
maybe
it's
not.
interesting still now. So I do think other considerations like trying to abolish poverty
Sure.
or to fight poverty, I think those are very valid considerations.
Right.
But so I think, but certainly automation makes us wonder if we're not going to have like a total crisis if we don't start adopting measures like this, which seems very likely, right? So
Right.
so it just as a matter, and this is not the moral question, this is more like the question of what is going to work for us to keep afloat, and we might really just need to start adopting these measures at some point, because if not, we won't stay afloat, right? Because
Mhm.
it's like the Great Depression. There were no jobs. It's not that people didn't want to work. The fundamental problem is that they didn't have jobs because there were no jobs. So that's why they had the state gave them some help, because if not, essentially they would starve, like they did starve in other places, like in Ireland, for example, with the potato famine and all that. I guess that so the problem might be just that there are no jobs. So in order for people not to starve or not to be in abject poverty, this might have, or something similar might need to be implemented just on a practical, as a practical consideration.
Right.
We're not there yet, but it's
No.
very possible that we will be. Like
We need
like
to
what
be
Vladimir
prepared.
saying, 2050.
You need to be prepared. It's not an inevitability. Who knows that maybe all these highly automated singularity type machines aren't really have been overhyped and won't really be like in autonomous vehicles. It's not as easy as they were claiming it to be. I mean, the proponents were claiming 4 or 5 years ago. They were saying that, and about, by 2020, was it Elon Musk who said that? I don't think he even believed himself.
Some people are basically trying to use these cars, these Teslas, in a way that they're in the back seat, and they're just using the driverless features. And they, there was one guy that he came out in the newspaper. He kept getting arrested. I don't know if you guys saw that. He kept getting arrested, and he kept, essentially buying a new Tesla every time because he has a bunch of money, and he doesn't agree with being arrested because he's not in the driver's seat, because he says it works just fine. So he obviously has a lot more money than he has common sense, because even Tesla says that that's not how you're supposed to use the cars at this point, because they're not ready for that. And it's just really a major hazard for other people as well as yourself.
Right. And so, but yeah. On the other hand, if the upsides, if you think about it, and if people then use their spare time wisely, rather than just playing video games all day or whatever, and volunteer to do, things that lead to human flourishing, to their own personal flourishing, maybe they volunteer to do, something in national parks, or maybe try to pursue their more artistic, cultivate their artistic leanings or things like that, might actually be something good that nobody expected would be that good. The benefits would be, and so it all depends on what you think human beings are like when you give them the time and the resources to do the things that make them happy, you know.
I think that's an interesting question that you're raising. I would be curious to see like what you guys think about that, because that is one of the questions, right? If people have enough money to not starve, or even have enough money to cover their basic expenses, or they're still going to pursue other interests which are useful for society, or are they just going to waste their time doing things that benefit nobody?
I think the question is it enough to live off of, or is it not? And maybe there's a little bit of a gray area there, but if it's not enough to live off of, then you can't just, I guess, like we talked about doing volunteering or.
Well,
or maybe
let's put it
just
this way. If it were enough or close to being enough, right? Because if it's not enough, okay, that question is not really that relevant, because people still need to work. But
Yeah.
but if we got to a point that, you know, and let's say for the sake of argument, instead of 1,000, you know, we get to a point that it's feasible to do 2,000 or 3,000, right? So let's say people don't actually need to work. They will benefit from working. They might make a lot more money. They might, you know, live more comfortably, but they don't really need to, right? Would they still be interested in doing things that, like Raul is saying, right, that will help society flourish, or will they just stay home in their, you know, boxers playing video games, let's say?
I
Or
can't,
maybe they, go ahead.
I can't remember who said it, but and I'm sure I'm butchering a quote, but someone said, you get a formal education to make a living, but you get a self-education to make a fortune. And
Mhm.
fortune, I think, was not money.
Right.
It was knowledge.
Mhm.
And no matter how much money you give me every month, I believe that me and everybody I'm looking at right now would still be engaged in some sort of self-education.
Right.
Of some kind. It doesn't matter if it benefits society or not directly. I personally think it would eventually
I think it
through
would,
discussions like this, but you know.
Or even not volunteering, maybe just that job that you would have loved, but it doesn't pay enough to keep you afloat, and now you'll be able to get that job, take that job. Maybe you like working with children, maybe you like working with you know, helping out people, and now with a basic income, then sustaining yourself is not an issue. Get that job to be, you know.
Yeah, of course, and this is kind of more. You guys might face a detail or more of just a technicality of the program, but if it's let's say someone's like a doctor, a lawyer, makes a very large salary. Now they're like, hey, I could do this job that I like more, that pays a lot less, because I'm getting that universal basic income. So they switch to that lower paying job, but now all the tax income we used to get from them, we get a lot less. So then there's like less money to fund the program.
Well,
So
that's a complication from my earlier question of if it's universal,
Right.
do you provide it to the people who are wealthy now?
yeah, well, I guess the thing is, even if you didn't provide it to them, let's say someone's like I don't know, a banker that makes like a very large amount of money. Maybe they want to work with, I don't know, work with kids like Raul said, so they'll switch to doing that, and then they'll have their basic income. But we'd lose all that revenue, so we couldn't use that revenue.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to run out of people who are interested in making money.
yeah. I think the big plunge in income from a banker or physician to a just basic income is really big, and you won't get many takers with that. And yeah, David, your issue about shall we give it to wealthy people? the point is right to have no means testing so that there's no bureaucracy, then
Yeah.
just tax it away at the end of the year, right? You know, so that's the way to go around that with you know, just
Well,
not have the bureaucracy.
I guess if you say from the outset,
Yeah,
we're not going to give it to wealthy people,
right.
then you have to have some sort of means testing.
Hmm.
You have to have a threshold.
Right.
And so the people that are at that threshold, they realize if I earn one more dollar, I lose $999 a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but it wouldn't, it would be like like, you know, the stimulus checks for COVID were like a sliding scale.
It's a
right?
marginal tax rate. So yeah,
Yeah, like you know how the stimulus payments for COVID were a sliding scale. So it's not like once you make this amount, no more stimulus check. It's
right.
Which means bureaucracy.
Right. Yeah, that's why you give it to wealthy people and that just have a progressive tax system to you know, take it back. And so you basically have the same sort of equity goal attained without the bureaucracy. And that's one way to go about it, roughly. You know.
Yeah, I think it should be something simple, because if not, we're sort of like replicating the same mistakes that we have now. So, but I don't know, like, I think in theory, yeah, just giving it to everybody is probably the way to go, because it's more simple. But also, it's also true that in the beginning, maybe it's better to limit it and to give it just to, say, the kind of like the people that need it the most at first,
Yeah.
just for a matter of actually being able to afford it at first while you're implementing it.
You know, and the other thing I was thinking about is that with that would go along with you know, a more effective or enhanced national service, not just military service, national service program. And no, I don't mean make it compulsory that if you get a basic income, then you have to, and you have no job, then you have to volunteer for the national service program. But you give people the opportunity to do things that benefit society. I think a lot of people will take you up on that if they will be able to live sustainably, you know. And so maybe I'm looking at it through rose-colored glasses, but these are the possible benefits to society.
Well, it may be that you're right, but
Yeah.
it seems to me like if you're not going to give it to some people because they make too much money, then the people you do give it to, they're going to have to fill out forms to prove that they're needy,
Right.
you know, and you're going to have to create a bureaucracy to assess those forms. To me, that defeats the purpose of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, the national service program, just the programs that the government have, and basically you volunteer.
You know, they have that in Switzerland, maybe some other countries too.
Yeah.
I only know about Switzerland because my wife and I hosted an exchange student from Switzerland.
Mhm.
But their national service is either the military
Right.
or some sort of community service
Right.
for 2 years.
Yeah. And it's mandatory. Right.
Yep.
But I don't know what the actual consequences would be or the outcome would be, but I kind of agree with you, Raul, and it's impossible without testing these things. I mean, it's impossible to say 100%, you know, what's
Yeah.
going to happen, but I do think that it's true. I mean, I think a lot of people, if they could live in a sustainable way, yes, they would be interested in those programs, because a lot of people are interested in participating in the community. They just,
Right.
you know, you can't participate in the community if you can't make enough money to pay rent. But
Mhm.
if you're okay, then yes, I mean, people I mean, especially women, certainly women. I think men as well, but women, they don't have the same tendencies that we have. They don't want to spend all day at home, playing video games or drinking, like. And this is actually this they have done tests about this and studies, so it's women for the most part, they need to. I mean, not all women, I'm sure, but the vast majority, they do want to be engaged doing something, in the society. So, but I mean, most men, I think, are also the same way. So I think maybe it wouldn't be everybody, but there would be a considerable amount of people that would be interested in those programs.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't
No,
need
I'd
to
like-
be everybody.
I'd like to ask you, like, what would you do with universal basic income, and how your life will be changed if, like, we try to generalize and say, like, how people will live, and will they, participate in some social programs, or whatever. But what's, like, your personal view? Like, what do you do with the universal basic income? How you would, live your life? So what do you guys think about it?
Good question. Good question.
Well, what I would, yeah, I would just try to learn a lot. I'd probably read more, do more math, exercise more, do more philosophy. I don't know, maybe take up
Buy
some,
a PlayStation 9.
yeah. So that's what I would do. Maybe volunteer. Yeah, I'd just be
Would you let's start with one thing, Michael. Would you keep your job?
If I had universal basic income.
Yeah.
Oh yes, because it's not enough to live off of. So yeah. But maybe I might have a different job. I don't know.
Right. Find
But
something.
or I might work part-time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people might end up working part-time instead of full-time and doing like those other things that you're suggesting.
Well, we may be working less without universal basic income.
Mhm.
In other words, it's not like 40 hours a week is carved in stone somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, maybe people would start shifting to working like 30 hours a week because yeah, universal basic income would cover the rest. I don't know.
I mean, in my case, Vladimir, I think, yeah, I would certainly enjoy having universal basic income. It kind of depends, like, it's hard to answer that question because it kind of depends on how much how much it is that you're getting. If it's a partial basic income, then you still need to figure out the finances of it. If it's full basic income, then you can really make that decision if you want to go to work or not. So it kind of depends. But if it's, I mean, I would say it wouldn't change like things dramatically, but it would make life more sustainable. Let's put it this way. You don't need to worry about, say, catastrophic poverty. You can put your kids in childcare, and it just makes things more sustainable, I would say. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I would still have to work, or for money.
Mhm. So it probably wouldn't change much. It's
Well-
just additional,
It changes
wow.
quite a bit. It changes
Mhm.
quite a bit. It just doesn't, depending on, it would kind of depend, the amount of change kind of depends on the amount of money that you get. But I wouldn't be interested in just not doing anything, because not doing anything is not that great. So I would either work formally or work informally, doing the things that I'm interested in, for self-growth and family stuff.
One thing that I don't think it would happen completely, but it could happen to a certain extent, is if you have people who are who are just going to do their universal basic income and nothing else, which means poverty, if you ask me.
Right.
But it could take some of the glamour out of positions, because if you know somebody doesn't have a job and they're getting by on their universal basic income, they're not going to get that new washer dryer. You spent half your UBI on that. So that's what I mean, but it might take the glamour off some of
Of
possessions.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know.
What about you, Raul?
Well, I wouldn't be, because I'm older than you guys, so I'm in my retirement years. So, and I don't think I'm, or most of us are not in that level where UBI would change things a lot for the better. It still would be a welcome thing, and I probably would just, if I get UBI, most of it will go to charitable causes, and then I continue the things I do now, things like this, educate myself, volunteer at the places that are interesting to me, which mainly art museums and things like that. And yeah, but I would love for a lot of other people to be able to do something close to what I do now, which is do the things that I really feel passionate about or really interested in, that I'd like to be doing, And so if universal basic income makes that possible for a lot more people, then I think that's good for society.
What about you, David?
Well, things would not change a lot for me either, unless you tried to tax me more than you do now, But I guess one thing that confuses me, that seems a little inconsistent, is some of the people that I've seen in the pro camp about universal basic income. One of the arguments they go to great efforts, by my perception, to make is that people would not spend this on video games and alcohol and tobacco. People know how to spend money, and they know what they need. And exactly the opposite argument was made with the inception of Social Security. People don't know that they need to put it away to save for a rainy day, so the government's going to have to do that for you. So I'm trying to figure out which one of those is true. Do people not know, or do they know?
I
I
guess
think we don't.
neither is true. Like, it all depends on different people. Some of them will know, some of them not.
Yeah, I think the people who aren't wise with their lives right now will still be not wise with their lives, and those who think things through will continue to think things through. And I guess the argument for that is maybe this is an easier way to address those problems without the bureaucracy that goes with, the traditional welfare approach. And who knows? Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking one way to think about that question that you're asking, David, is, do people know what to do with their money now? Because is there really a big difference between, what they do with their money now and what they do with
Well, the
their
prospect
money
of
with
UBI doesn't change that,
Right. No, it doesn't. Yeah.
Right. So I don't think it
won't.
really
No.
changes all that much,
Yeah.
right? I think, some people are great with their money. Some people are more, decent with their money, and some people will spend it all on, booze, so it kind of, it really can go like Vladimir said, maybe there isn't an answer to that question.
No, there will always be that segment too, and I think of it as a public health problem, not a character problem usually. But the kind of interesting thing is that if there are, like Milton Friedman was a very big a proponent of a negative income tax, which is pretty close to not exactly, but pretty close to a universal basic income. And so it's if you believe that people should have the freedom to choose, that you don't want a nanny state telling people what to do with their lives, then the universal basic income is supposed to be premised on the belief that most people are wise enough to know what to do with their lives if you give them a sustainable income. Yeah.
Raul, what does that entail, the negative income tax?
It's like a basic, it's if you,
The opposite, right?
yeah, just bring everyone up to a basic target level, and those who make income above that get taxed. Just like a regular income tax system. And so it's like a payment to bring everyone up who's below the whatever poverty line or the target level, to bring them all up to whatever is the UBI target, and then those above that, their incomes, they start paying taxes at progressive rates, hopefully. And so it's different. It's just not a across the board payment to everyone. It's actually graduated payments depending on what your income is. But that is a lot of bureaucracy still, because you can't, at the end of the year, you have to count, okay, what's your income and what did you receive? And so you have to pay back, or you have to get some more,
So basically, if you don't make enough, instead of paying taxes, you get taxes.
Yeah, you get a subsidy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's still a lot of bureaucracy, because at the end of the year, if your estimated income is higher than what you is lower than what you actually got, then you have to, pay back.
Right.
And that's hard. That's hard on people who are at the,
Yeah.
who don't have a lot of discretionary income, to make them pay back stuff, that in low likelihood they spent already.
Sure. Yeah. But Vladimir, what would you do with the universal basic income?
Well, the same what I'm doing right now. So actually, I don't need a lot of money to live.
Right.
For me, $1,000 is like it's enough to live for the entire year, not just a month. So.
You throw parties for all your friends, right?
No,
Yeah.
I'll probably not even take it. Like, not to make myself
Sure.
more dependent on
Sure.
some
Yeah.
on money or whatever else.
Yeah, but it's yours, and if you decide to give it away, to give it to charity or to some, yeah, that's the whole point, that people, you still have control over your life.
Actually, I've heard some kind of proposal. I don't remember from where. Maybe a year ago, like exactly the opposite of universal basic income in Russia. So the idea is, if you don't work, you have to pay. You have to pay some
So if you don't work, you have to pay.
Yeah, if you don't work, if you don't pay taxes, you have to pay some penalty. And yeah, it was actually like on a government level proposal from some guy. And
Really?
Ouch.
How do you pay that?
I don't know.
Service, maybe? Or,
Maybe, yeah. They'll just make you work if you. Yeah, like in the Soviet Union. So the bottom line was that if you don't work, you're kind of lazy person, and everybody had to work. So they
Right.
they forced you to work, even if like some creative guys, like some musicians, still are working on some stupid jobs,
Mhm.
coal mining or.
Yeah. And it's also, there's some parallels within the Depression where the US federal government just basically, the way it was described is you hire people to dig ditches and then you hire people to fill them back up. And basically that's kind of like a universal basic income, but instead of just giving to you, say, okay, we'll pretend to make you work, even though what you're doing
It's like useless,
is
right?
it's not really necessary, and that helped us, alleviate a lot of suffering, and it also kind of stimulated the economy a bit to put money in people's pockets so they could spend and help the economy get going.
Yeah, probably one of the other reasons may be for universal basic income that they try to stop this, material craving for, since we like our economy on a global level, it's still like if we compare it what was like 100 years ago, 200 years ago. So we have lots of stuff, but on as David said, like on an educational level, we're still like we're still very on a very low level, like globally. So if we just give this universal basic income to everybody, maybe it's going to solve this problem, so people start learning and studying more and dedicating their time to self-improvement, self-development, instead of just craving for more and more stuff. Do we actually need more stuff? Maybe we just need to spend more time thinking about something else.
Yeah.
Not building more cities, but building more
Yeah.
Well,
education knowledge.
yeah, that would be ideal for humankind, if we invested a lot more on building ourselves through education and less on just material gains, because
Right.
it's really a problem, because we've built a system that is very unsustainable, because it's all about growth, economic growth, and economic growth means producing more, and producing more demands more resources and we're basically running out of resources. So the system can't really be sustainable as it is right now. So we are going to have to figure out a way to change that, because it's just simply not sustainable.
Yeah. Well, but it sounds kind of what you call this? Not ironic, but counter. What's the term?
Intuitive?
Pardon?
Counterintuitive.
Counterintuitive, but this problem of we're making too much stuff will only be solved by making more stuff, I think, but more stuff in terms of knowledge.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And like, for example, knowledge and developing the technology for alternative energy sources, which we desperately need to find, in the next couple of decades, or we're shot.
Yes.
And it's still not there. Even all the, still not there. It's getting there.
So yeah, I mean, that kind of like bring the universal basic income should really just be one of the things that we do to really reform the whole economic production system that we have, because it's come to a point that it's really not sustainable. So I think people should really start to acknowledge that we've come to a point that we really need like some pretty big changes in order to just make things sustainable, and that it's just not really an option to keep doing things exactly in the same way, because it's not only we have like crazy income inequality at this point, which still keeps growing exponentially, but also we have the added addition that we have very serious environmental problems as well. On top of that, so really, it's not sustainable, and UBI could help at least with the income inequality part, which is actually really crazy if you look at the actual statistics, the actual charts of how income inequality is growing. That just doesn't seem like it's something that can be sustained, because it's just crazy that 80%, 80 people in the world own more than I think it's 3 or 4 billion. So 80 people own more wealth than 3 or 4 billion people out of 8 billion, less than 8 billion. So I mean, that, and if that keeps growing, which it is growing, I mean, that is not really a system of distribution of resources that can be maintained over time.
Right. It's not even a matter of fairness, even throwing fairness issues, considerations aside, that is not sustainable. You can't. And down the line, maybe the biggest proponents of universal basic income would be the billionaires and mega corporations, when they finally figure out that, we won't be able to sustain our industries, our businesses, if our customers disappear.
Who's gonna pay for stuff, right? If
Right.
everybody is, if people don't have money because all money is concentrated on the hands of a few, I mean, people can't buy for stuff. I mean,
Right.
sorry, people can't pay for stuff. People can't buy stuff.
Yeah.
One of the videos that I watched about universal basic income, one of the proponents was talking about a tax on a corporation that would go up the greater the disparity between the CEO pay and an employee pay.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you don't raise all the boats in the company,
Right.
if you do like this, then
Right.
a tax is engaged.
Right.
But I don't know. Good luck selling that idea.
Who's gonna build that cat? Right.
Yeah, that's kind of a complicated one, but the idea is, I think, is useful. And I was watching a documentary the other day about cars, about more precisely Fiat, and in Italy, and both Fiat and Ford. Well, Fiat would kind of like copied the Ford model in many ways, but the idea in terms of the pay of the workers, the worker pay, is that there's a reason why they paid a lot more than other companies at the time. Both Ford in the United States and Fiat in Italy, is because they wanted their workers to be able to afford their stuff, right? Because they were building the market. If you pay people enough money to buy your stuff, then you actually have a market, which is something that the Chinese have done as well in their economy. So you gotta have people you gotta build your middle class so they can buy stuff, so the economy can prosper. And that crazy imbalance of wealth just doesn't, at the end of the day, it cannot be sustained because of that, because it just doesn't work.
That's something that Singapore did as well. I think, if I remember things correctly, I think about 20 years ago, they raised the minimum wage to really a very high level. And most people were saying, well, you mean you're going to pay a fast food worker that amount of money? And their response was, we want our economy to be a highly educated, highly technological economy, because that's where the future growth is going to come from. And so we're going to speed that up. We're going to, pay people higher and also educate them so that,
Another thing that could be hastened by raising the minimum wage, which I think people deserve to make a living, and I don't know where that cutoff is.
Sure.
But some of the technology that's on the horizon McDonald's is already testing
Right.
a fully automated kitchen. And if the minimum wage is raised too much, then that will hasten the day when people lose their jobs to automation,
Hmm.
in my opinion.
Yeah. And
I think I heard, oh, just a random comment, but yeah, I read an article recently. There was like a state that tried to, so at the grocery store how you could do the self checkout, scan the stuff yourself. I don't know if the grocery stores near you guys have that. But they were going to make a law limiting it to just 2 machines per store because cashiers are losing their jobs.
right.
And like went to the Supreme Court. I forgot what the ruling was, but yeah.
Yeah, that stuff, Paul Bunyan stuff doesn't work,
Yeah.
in my
Okay.
opinion.
What's Paul Bunyan stuff?
Well, Paul Bunyan, if you remember the tall tale, was a lumberjack, and
In Minnesota.
there was a
Yeah.
contest between Paul Bunyan and a robot that chopped down trees.
Hmm.
And Paul Bunyan won because he's great and legendary, but we're not going to win that for much longer.
No, that's the thought then in Singapore is we're headed that way. We want to get there ahead of everyone, so we're hastening things up, and
Which makes sense. It's a good strategy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good strategy.
Right.
Because some of these things, like I was hearing the other day as well. Like I read I think it was The Economist. I read an article there, and which, by the way, I subscribe to The Economist. I'm very happy. It's a fantastic publication. I don't if
Mhm.
I would certainly recommend you guys check it out.
No, it's very good. Yeah.
It's very good, The Economist, because it really gives you what they call a view from the moon, right? It's a global perspective on things. So I love it.
They
The
have an
prob-
app too.
They have an app, and the app is actually a little bit more affordable. The problem with The Economist is that it's very expensive. But you get a deal for the first 3 months. I think I paid $30 for the first 3 months, and I get the magazine at home. It's weekly, and I get to use the app. So, but I'll have to see after 3 months because it's kind of expensive. So basically, the article was about the fact that people are complaining in the United States that these companies are complaining that they can't hire enough people. They need more workers, right? Now that the pandemic is subsiding and they have a little bit more business, they want to hire more workers. So they're saying that, well, they're having trouble hiring workers, maybe because of the subsidies that the state is giving them and so on. But the thing is, the economists are actually on kind of like on the side of the workers, and they're just seeing that they're pointing out that, well, you don't really have a problem. You don't have enough workers. That's not really your problem. Your problem is that you're not paying your workers enough money for them to make sense to work for you. So it's really not a problem of not having enough people. It's more a matter of wages just need to match the actual cost of living in the country. Which another interesting statistic is that they haven't really they haven't gone up since the 70s in the United States in real terms. Wages have been stagnant for 50 years. It's a long time, and at that time the generation of wealth in the country has grown a lot.
It hasn't kept up with per capita GNP, which is tells you that there's
not at all. I mean,
wrong.
because they haven't gone up, so they haven't
Yeah.
really at all kept up.
There's something wrong. There's it's just not right.
Well, yeah, there's an imbalance in the economy that might be a consequence of just an imbalance in power in society.
Basically. Yeah.
Well, another thing that someone pointed out in one of these videos that I watched about universal basic income, I thought it was an interesting idea that you're paying people to this amount of money. You're trying to eradicate abject poverty, at least. By doing that, you're kind of like getting rid of some of the externalities that come with poverty, right? Like crime, for example, costs for the public health care. And you are actually saving a lot of money by getting rid of those problems, by getting rid of the problem of crime that comes with poverty, the extra money that you have to spend in policing, the extra money that you have to spend in healthcare, in social workers. There's a bunch of things that you can actually eliminate just by having these programs. And in fact, in Britain, they had one program that they spent, the budget was 50,000. It was in London, 50,000 pounds to solve a problem of homelessness in that specific area in the city. And they spent 50,000 pounds, and they actually solved the problem to a good extent by just giving people money, because a lot of them actually found a place to live and actually eventually found a job. And some of those externalities started going away, and then actually figured, well, this is actually pretty cheap. These 50,000 pounds that we're giving them actually is actually very cheap compared to what we were spending before. And I don't know if this would work on a global scale, but it kind of shows us that that's one of the aspects of it.
And where did they get the 50,000 pounds?
It was the government's money, I believe. It was just
Just a
from
budget.
taxpayers.
yeah, they
Yeah.
figure, well, instead of like spending this money for our social workers and the hospital
And the
and all these
programs.
programs that we have to try to figure out this problem in this area of the city, let's just give them money, see if they get out of this situation, and we can just solve the situation this way. And it actually
Right.
worked.
Right. And yeah. And I would think that in a place like London, where housing is so expensive, the homelessness problem is not really similar to what's going on in New York. I don't think so. I think it's really people who, normal people, are just down on their luck. And then their lives just spiral. As once you lose your home, it's hard to cope with everything else. And
I heard a statistic today that 47% of the homeless people in the United States are in California.
mhm,
How much? 47, you said?
47%
Wow.
are in California.
right.
The weather's nice there.
Weather's nice, yeah, and plus they have a high population to start with. There's a lot of people probably from other places who go to California because don't freeze in the winter.
Also, housing is not very affordable in California. I think it's awfully
Yeah.
expensive.
Same thing. Yeah. And
I mean, $1,000 in California is actually not even gonna, help you like pay for rent in some cities, like
No.
in LA or San Francisco.
No.
That's definitely San Francisco.
Might keep you from starving to death,
right.
but
Yeah.
it won't provide you with a house.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you can live like in a really bad place, but which is better than nothing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, if there are 5 of you, then you can pool your resources and rent a
True.
decent sized place. Maybe not 5, maybe 3.
Yeah,
Something.
that would be a creative way to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. When Bruno, you were talking about the negative externalities from poverty, I just got reminded of, it's very similar. From homelessness is also, and it's a related problem, that the drug addiction problem is the same type of approaches have to be considered. And I know that, or at least I've read, well, I've been there, I've seen it, that Vancouver had a very successful anti-drug addiction program. They basically removed criminality from it all, you know. And if you need, if you have a drug habit, like a heroin habit, and you want to break your habit, we'll help you with it. They set up clinics and everything, and you just walk in, you get your methadone shot, and a lot of people have been able to you know, recover at least their old lives. They're able to get back on jobs, find housing, and things like that. And those types of solutions, I think, need to be given more consideration rather than just a drug addict, bad person, you don't deserve anything, you know, any help or whatever.
Drug addict.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. Yeah, I think the homelessness thing, I think that's where I think the universal basic income would actually come into, and it would actually contribute the most.
Right.
It would be to provide people with at least that security, that they don't need to be just like in this abject poverty, right? That because in we don't really have a social net that really allows people to be completely safe from those problems. I mean, if you run out of cash, I mean, you're probably going to end up on the street. I mean, it's happening, unfortunately, to people now with the pandemic, that people are
Yeah.
just being evicted because they can't pay for rent, you know. And that would, I mean, if people are homelessness, they stop being a productive member of society, and that's just kind of a fact, because you can't really do much if you're in a homeless position.
No.
And
Well, I don't think, I think UBI might be a good thing, but I don't think it will solve all the problems we have. We
No,
still
it
need to
won't.
be creative.
Yeah.
no, absolutely not. But
Yeah.
it's one thing that we can do.
I think it's part of a creative approach to, you know.
I would even say the environmental problem is a huge problem. I think with the UBI, one way to finance it as well, I think maybe, you know, taxes on CO2 emissions and all kinds of negative externalities, the negative impact of industrial production, technological production, all that. Why not tax the things that are bad for the planet, and also the things that are bad for people? You know, why not tax tobacco use?
We
And-
should
It
do
already
that
is.
anyway.
I know we should. I think it's a great way. I love taxes. I love taxing, the idea of taxing people and companies in order to improve the world, to basically
We should
give
reduce the
them an
tax on
incentive
beer,
not to
though.
do bad things.
Now we'll just tax imported beer.
Well, because
David.
because taxes is kind of unpleasant, right? If you're
That
taxing
is in St.
individual,
Louis, Missouri.
Oh, okay.
because if you're taxing individual people, it's kind of unpleasant. You know, they've worked for that money. You know, you're taking the money away from them. But no, like, well, I mean, maybe we still need to keep that up. But you know, I think a lot of taxes should really be used to discourage bad behavior. You know, like tobacco, that's going to kill you. So I'm going to tax you. So it has the added benefit that it's also going to save your life on top of, you know, you actually paying taxes. And if you have to pay taxes on tobacco, it's suddenly, I'm sure it seems less appealing.
But I understand what you're saying and what you're after, and part of me agrees with that. But at the same time, you create a perverse incentive for government, because they get more money in taxes if they encourage people to smoke.
Right.
Yeah, that's not the idea, though. I mean, but yeah, I mean, you're right. But I guess the idea would be for people to gradually stop smoking, and then you have to tax something else, right? But there's always stuff to tax. I mean, people they're always doing bad stuff. So I'm sure you'll never come to a point. I mean, just the environment problem alone. I mean, I think taxing companies when they do something that hurts the environment, I think that's a good way to go.
And besides, if you tax the oil companies, you're you're really taxing the consumers of the oil as well, and so I'm fine with that. You know.
Well,
And it's
the thing
fair
is that-
because there are externalities that go
yeah,
with
it's
the
fair. It's
consumption
only
of
fair.
those
I mean,
things,
we
right? Yeah.
really do need to switch away from fossil fuels anyway.
well, if you
Yeah.
have a pasture that's open, the tragedy of the commons thing. If you have a
Mhm.
pasture that's open to the public, and some guy comes in and grazes all his cattle there, and they eat all the grass, you should tax that guy.
Right.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's the same principle, is it not?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you're destroying, you know,
If you're hurting the planet, if
Right.
you're hurting the environment, at some point you're going to have to pay for that.
Mm-hmm.
and this is something that shouldn't really be that controversial if we
Yeah.
think about it in those terms. It's like agriculture. You're not going to destroy the soil and just be fine with it, right? I mean, an agriculture, you know, a farmer, someone who works in agriculture, you know, a farmer is not just going to destroy his farm and think, okay, it's okay. I mean, if he's smart enough, I mean, he'll see, well, I have to preserve the soil, right? So I can keep doing this in the future. And that's with the environment. It's the same thing. We have to preserve the environment, or it's simply not going to work out.
So yeah, I think so. Obviously, there do exist regulations in place like that. The question is, are there enough of them? So I think that's which I would argue there's not. But like obviously, oil companies can't pollute however they want. There are regulations in place that they have to satisfy. It's just that we would probably argue, probably the people in this call would argue there's not enough of them, and CEOs of the oil companies would argue that they're overly stringent as they are. So that's the battle. So the real question is, how do we win that battle? But yeah.
Well, you tell the stockholders, like what Exxon went through. You had an activist stockholder, whatever, and organized, got the support of the major mutual fund companies, and said, let's vote directors on the Exxon board who will kind of force them to look more towards alternative fuels and cut their Exxon's fossil fuel habit, because Exxon, among all the majors, said, no, we're just focusing on fossil fuels. That's what we're good at. We're not going to focus on like the other British Petroleum, all the other coal companies are doing. They're actually actively trying to develop their alternative energy programs, and Exxon wasn't. And the pitch was not really the environment, but Exxon was performing badly at the market, in the economy, because their oil focused, fossil fuel focused strategy wasn't very profitable this last 3 years. Their stock price has actually gone down. So they are able to sell that on a purely economic basis. And so that's one way to go about it, to just, I mean, you can only pretend that the climate problem doesn't exist for so long. Eventually you have to confront it. And yeah.
So I think I certainly agree, Raul. One thing that well, and let me know if there are things that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about. Something that we'll probably talk about this in the future as well, but I just want to kind of like ask you, what are your thoughts on work, and would people be sort of like disoriented without work if they didn't actually need to work to pay their bills? Do we need work to give meaning to our lives as such? Maybe, yeah, it would be interesting to talk a little bit about that, the meaning of work in our lives in the 21st century.
I think that's a fascinating question. I really don't know what would happen if everyone had the ability to stop working. Yeah, I think they may very well lose meaning or not really know what it is they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I think it's a cultural shift, and just people have to learn how to think in a different way, that you are not your job. Don't let your job define who you are. And certainly there are some people for whom the work they have is something that they really want to do. And even if they don't have to do it, they'll probably choose to do it. And I bet that's true for a lot of people. And, you know,
In
Yes.
my view, and I can only speak for myself, I can't speak for anybody else. We often hear people talking about, I have to do this to find myself, or I need to do this for meaning or purpose, or what, you know. For me, meaning, self, and purpose are not things that you find.
Right.
They're things that you make.
mhm.
And it's up to us what we are going to make them out of.
Yeah.
Are we going to make them out of knowledge and good works? Or are we going to make them out of celebrity and
Mhm.
the magazines at the newsstand, at the checkout in the grocery store? You know, I choose the former.
Well, what about you, Vladimir? What do you think?
About work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
Work
like,
and meaning of life for you.
my personal view is kind of different. I mean, I
No,
don't like
but
work.
but we can talk about our views, because it's hard to say what other people think about it. You know, like it's very difficult. We can
I
have
think
some general notions. But
I think it's all kind of ideology, like all this work, like all this since in the beginning of industrial era, like people started worrying about work and this time, what they can do, what they can't do. Like for me, we may do pretty well if nobody works, and like by work I mean like this something that you are forced to do by somebody else.
Right.
So as soon as like with this universal basic income, for example, you have decide what you are going to do with your time. And I think like when we get rid of this ideology that you have to have work, people will find out the way how they will spend their time. And if some people will play video games, that's okay. They may play, and it's not a big deal. I mean, we'll still have enough productivity to maintain our civilization, and nothing terrible will happen. I don't know. Like for me, I don't like to work. I don't like to do anything that I don't understand, or that I understand and I don't see any real benefits for myself. So I had many works in my life. I tried to do lots of things, and I discovered that I didn't like anything what I was doing, unless I did it on my own, like without being forced by somebody else.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I like to study, and I think like in next 20-30 years we'll have kind of what they call it, informational era instead of industrial era. So
Right.
people like knowledge is going to be knowledge, and what kind of informational economy. So like people are going to chase knowledge and like transform the way they live for their lives.
Exactly.
Like instead of money, like nobody is going to care about money. People are going to care about what they know, what they do in life, some creativity. Yeah,
Well,
something like that.
I don't agree with all of that. I think people are always gonna care about money, but one thing that I think, but I think you're right about a bunch of things, and for example, think about one example of one work that people might have, which is working at McDonald's. A lot of people work at McDonald's, right? And it's good in a sense
No,
that
I would just shut up all McDonald's, like all of them. Since
well, that's kind of my point, right? Because I mean, I wouldn't shut up, shut off McDonald's because I mean, it's not my business. But the point is, all of these workers are doing something that is ultimately useless, right? It's nice that they pay taxes, and that's kind of like the only utility that I see from it, coming from it, but really McDonald's only makes the world worse. I mean, that's the naked reality, the ugly truth, right? And I mean, you don't need to be a genius to understand this, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious.
I guess like your
McDonald's.
question was more about like the nature of work, like should we like
Well,
continue?
yeah, but
And
but I was just saying this because, like you're saying, like a lot of the work that people do, it's basically shit. You're not really
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
anything that makes anything
And-
Yeah,
better.
yeah. Let me know how that works out for you when you tell a person who works at McDonald's that their work is totally useless. Let me know how that works out for you.
Well, I'll probably try to avoid committing that faux pas, but I mean, it.
I mean, I wouldn't go
True.
that far that McDonald's doesn't serve some social purpose because the people are not being forced to go there. But I would say the
Well,
fact
what's that social purpose, bro? I mean, it makes
What?
people fat and
well-
unhealthy.
well, yeah, that's true, but not everyone goes to McDonald's, and it's a cheap meal, right? And for some people, it's a way to get a cheap meal, and I wish it
Fair
would.
enough.
Maybe what you mean is you wish we lived in a world that people won't have to, would be able to go to some other place that gives you a more nutritious, a better meal, but they're there, and and
Yeah, food deserts.
yeah,
And it's not that, but like so yeah. I'll admit, I go to Taco Bell quite a bit. Well, maybe like twice a week or something,
I have go ahead.
just to get like $1 like bean and rice burrito.
Yeah.
I don't put the nacho cheese on it, but surprisingly, you guys are gonna laugh at me. I don't think it's that much less healthy than like dining out. If you're, just going to a sit-down restaurant.
Right. I can't go 3 months without KFC, just to let people know. It's,
Well, these
it's an
places
addiction.
are not in business because they're providing nutrition.
Yeah.
They're in business because they're making money.
Mhm.
That and if you think it's any other thing, it's an illusion.
No. Mm. But-
Well, McDonald's, I would argue, is it makes things much worse than it makes things better. But I guess that's a whole different debate. But I would argue this for. I mean, I think there are a couple of reasons that are pretty strong. Like the environmental impact that McDonald's has is terrible. Also, it really, like, the food is extremely unhealthy, and people would probably be eating something different if they weren't eating that really unhealthy food. So I do think that, honestly, and I think this could be a debate. I don't know if it's an interesting enough debate for us to actually do it, but it would be a debate. You might change my mind. My initial perspective is that it makes things worse. But I would, I like what you said. Maybe I shouldn't have talked about McDonald's. Maybe I should have talked about the fact that you said, Vladimir, we actually wouldn't need anything else because we already produce enough, for people to actually live, and it's true. I mean, before 90% of the people were actually committed to the business of making food, agriculture, right? 90% of the people, give or take, were farmers. Now we don't need those 90% of people to actually produce that food. Now we use about 20% of the people, if that much.
Actually,
produce
in
that food.
1900, it was 70%, and today it's 2%.
2%
2%?
in agriculture, but not food processing and all that. Agriculture.
Okay, so what's food processing? Maybe 5%, 10%?
Yeah.
Let's say,
I think waiters and waitresses are actually quite a size percentage.
yeah, but that's not food
Yeah,
production.
That's service.
Definitely
Yeah.
less than 20%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if
Yeah.
you don't have anyone to serve you, you can still like serve your own food, right? So I'm
Right,
saying
right.
you'd still have enough to eat.
Mhm.
And we have but let's be generous, right? I mean, 10% of people are engaged in this thing that usually before, for the vast majority of time, it used to be 90% or 95% of people. Now we only need 10% of the people really to do this job. So 90% of the other people really, I mean, except for some jobs that are actually essential, like cops and judges and firemen and all that. I mean, the vast majority of people do things that are actually concerned with making our lives a little bit more comfortable, making things for us to use that we enjoy using, but it's not like actually we need it. Like microwave, you can still heat your food in a different way, but it's convenient to have a microwave. So we would still be okay. I agree with you,
But-
Vladimir.
A microwave uses less
Less
energy
energy.
than a range.
Yeah.
Well,
But
fair enough.
we know what you mean. We get
Fair
what you
enough,
mean,
but we could probably still survive without
Yeah.
microwaves, right?
No,
We could- civilization could still go on, probably.
I do agree to the point that what people should and I would not, I count me in mea culpa that there was a time in my life where it just I wanted stuff, and a lot of people still, it's you turn on the television and you walk down the main street and it's all this message that bombarding you from everywhere. Get more stuff. You need more stuff. You aren't happy unless you have stuff, and we need to break that
Invisible hand marketing.
habit. Yeah.
Well, you know why we are bombarded by that? It's because we wouldn't buy it if we
exactly.
we weren't.
Yeah.
It's
No.
very simple, right? When you come down to it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why do you buy these Barbie dolls?
Right.
Like because you're watching. Well, not you in this case. I mean, probably your little daughter. She's watching these ads, and now she absolutely needs the Barbie, right?
Yeah.
Whereas before she would never think of the Barbie, right?
Mhm.
So that's how they sell stuff.
And the thing is, Thoreau was it Thoreau? Yeah, it was Thoreau figured it out 100 years ago, more. And yeah, just
And
stuff.
it's not like we like these things are bad or anything, but it's true, like what Vladimir is pointing out. I think it's true. At the end of the day, 10% of the people are producing enough food for people to actually live their lives. So everything else is kind of a bonus.
Well, I'd like those people who build houses to be.
Yeah, the people that build houses are kind of useful.
to continue being employed. Yeah.
Let's have those people keep doing that as well.
Doctors, teachers.
Yeah.
It was actually my first job. I was graduated from college as a builder,
Hmm.
and I was working building houses for a couple of years.
Right.
I spent one summer roofing houses, and that's what encouraged me to go to college.
What was that like working building houses?
It was terrible. No, building houses.
It's hard work.
Roofing houses.
No. I was asking Vladimir about his experience.
Oh.
Yeah, basically I worked when I was studying, like it was kind of practice. So it wasn't just work, it was like half studying, half
Training.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Yeah, it was hard, but you know,
Did you
everything is-
enjoy it?
I wouldn't say I enjoyed, but I enjoyed. You know, I was young, like 18 years old. I
Sure.
enjoyed getting money and spending them.
Yeah.
Drinking, whatever. Going to nightclubs that time.
No, I like building things. I'm not, there's something. I not that I built a house or something. I make furniture. It's
Yeah, but
my
works like
hobby, but-
I didn't like the work since I was, I was just basically you have to do something.
Yeah.
And people are like standing, telling you like go there,
Right.
bring this thing there, and so
Oh, okay. So you weren't
Yeah.
really, you were just an errand boy or a gopher or something.
yeah, it's like half,
Yeah.
you they give you some tasks and you basically
Yeah.
work on these tasks, to build the wall, and you
Mhm.
just do like the same routine job for 5-10 hours.
Oh yeah.
And somebody comes and tells you, no, you have to do this in a different way. No, you did something wrong here. Change that.
I think that's kind of like why you and me, we kind of have like this aversion to like those kinds of jobs, because we like to think by ourselves, we like to have our own ideas.
Yeah.
So
That's why I
that's like the
couldn't,
really annoying part of those
Right.
jobs.
that's why I couldn't stay like all these types of jobs.
Sure.
Since there's some authority and people just tell you. And most of the time, these people who tell you what to do and how to do, they have no idea.
True, yeah.
What's really going on? It's
Yeah.
the
Makes
most,
it even worse.
yeah, it's the most annoying part that
But the problem with because agriculture, at least it's a job that if you're growing stuff for yourself, then at least it's kind of like satisfying because you're producing your food, but and you can see the results. But I mean, something that people have been pointing out since the beginning of industrialization is that a lot of this work is alienating, right? So because you're only really a cog in the machine.
Right.
So, and it's not, it's kind of obvious, right? Because you're not going to get a whole lot from it, because you're just like you're just producing stuff that you're not going to use, essentially.
just another form of slavery, this wage slavery.
Yeah, people have likened it to slavery, and it's true in the sense that you do lose a lot of your agency and you do lose lots of your freedom. So in a figurative way, yeah, I mean, I think it's appropriate. But I mean, maybe we're coming to a point that because we've come to a point that we do generate enough things for, and we have automation, and we've automated a lot of these processes. Maybe we are coming to a point that we don't need to work those jobs anymore, at least not to the same extent, and people can regain some of their freedom in that sense.
Yeah. No. But
I mean, hunter-gatherers, they were a lot freer than than people in industrialized societies, which is kind of like, it's a weird thing to think about, is because we've come all this way, we've spent tens of thousands of years trying to make things better, and we've ended up in a position that we're essentially worse in many ways.
I watched the video on YouTube recently on like a hunter-gatherer people. But yeah, it's like, yeah, their whole body is like more like fit to hunt and stuff like that. Nowadays it's like, yeah, we're just behind the computer so much that it's almost like it would be hard to go back to that. But yeah.
yeah, but that'll be easy to get back to. It's going to be hard the first couple of months, or maybe the first year, but yeah, I mean, the archaeologists and anthropologists have documented that the switch from hunter-gathering, from foraging to agriculture, actually was resulted into people actually being shorter, suffering more diseases, but for sure dental caries increased, and that's one of the markers that archaeologists would look at when they unearth, these ancient skeletons, ancient skulls. If the teeth were intact, no caries, no rotten teeth, then it's a low carbohydrate diet, which means it's a foraging or a hunting or a herding society that eats a lot of meat and not a lot of grains. And and also the first agricultural settlements, the average sizes of the skeletons were significantly smaller, shorter than hunter-gathering societies.
The
Yeah.
stuff I'm reading is exactly the opposite.
Mhm.
What are you reading?
Now, I'm reading and watching some videos about ancient cultures and
Right.
hunter-gatherers,
Yeah.
and it's exactly the opposite.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I've read the complete, the average has really just gone down with and the diseases that are evident in the remains of the early agricultural societies are diseases of not exactly malnutrition, but unbalanced diets, because high in grains, high in, the Romans were a lot shorter than the Germanic tribes that they fought against. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
where the discrepancies from.
I read what I've read is what you're describing, Raul, as well.
Right.
One of the books that I read is called The China Study. It's written by T. Colin Campbell, who he did a study in the Philippines
Mm-hmm.
in the late 70s, early 80s, I think, where they were. He was a dairy farmer.
Right.
He was working on his doctorate, and part of his program was to try to through nutrition affect positively the high incidence of liver cancer among children in the Philippines.
Right.
And at the time, one of the primary interests of nutritionists and doctors, scientists of the day, was to increase the protein intake. And so he worked with another scientist in the Philippines and later in China to introduce casein, which is a protein that's in milk or dairy products.
Right.
And because that's where he came from. And they found out that that protein is important, but if 20% of the diet of these Filipino children came from dairy, 20% of the protein came from dairy, the incidence of liver cancer went up. If it was less than 5% from dairy, it went down.
Mm-hmm.
So he was able to establish in the largest study of nutrition ever conducted anywhere, was done in China. He was able to establish, to my satisfaction anyway, a causal link between casein and cancer. So maybe the people were not taller or shorter, but I don't know if they had less cancer,
Oh, yeah, but that's a different setting than from just a change in basically food production or the society from a hunter-gatherer to an agricultural, because this is it's not as if we now are smaller than hunter-gathering societies in terms of physical.
Well, if I
Yeah,
understood what
but
you were saying, and maybe you weren't saying this, but if
Mhm.
I understood what you were saying that people who ate grains were not as healthy as people who ate meat.
Not today. Okay,
Okay.
I'm not talking about the situation today. It's a lot more complicated, but certainly people in a high, you know this debate going on, a high carbohydrate meal is not that good for you. I'm talking about when the transition from foraging to an agricultural society occurred, there was a big dip in the quality of the nutrition of the average person, not the elites of the societies. And that has all been exceeded now, at least in the West, because of modern agriculture and modern production techniques. And it was probably exceeded maybe 200, 150 years ago, I would think, But, and I totally not contest what you read, that there's certainly pockets where, people are not as well nourished as they could be. Yeah.
And even now, Raul, I mean, it's not just about being nourished. I mean, that was certainly a problem before, or an issue before. Now it's more a matter of we have too much, and that actually is a bigger problem in some ways, because obesity kills far more people than famine.
And I mean, now we're eating the wrong things.
We're eating the wrong thing. If you eat McDonald's, that's actually not good for your body. So hunter-gatherer they were quite a bit healthier than the modern American, for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Or Mexican or German. So
right.
There's a subset of nutritionists that characterized the standard American diet by its acronym, SAD.
Well, I was just looking at, I watched one of these TED Talks that I watched about UBI. I mean, he actually had like a graph saying, it was basically, the interesting thing about the graph that he was pointing out is that there's a very close correlation between income inequality and social problems, and that includes being unhealthy, right? So the United States actually happened to have the biggest income inequality by quite a big margin from all the developed countries. In the study, there were about 20 countries, and it also had by quite a significant margin the biggest incidence of both unhealthiness and all sorts of social problems like poverty and crime and all that. So, which is kind of crazy, when you consider that the United States is not only the richest country in the world, it's actually one of the richest per capita in the world, in spite of its size. So it's hard to understand. Well, unless you look at the correlation with income inequality, then it becomes predictable. Because if you have a bunch of people that are pretty well off, but then you have, 40 million people in a state of poverty, then you're still going to have those problems. And Japan was actually the one that had the lowest income inequality and the lowest incidence of unhealthiness and social problems, followed by the Nordic countries. And
now it was when you mentioned the Nordic countries last week or a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Were you talking about universal basic income then? Because they did some experiments in Switzerland, Finland. Yeah.
No, I wasn't mentioning that. I was just mentioning, I was kind of like trying to talk about because talking about capitalism and socialism as opposites, that kind of like gives us an idea, but it's not really capitalist or socialist really in the real world. I mean, the United States is as Frank likes to point out, is a mixed economy and has always been a mixed economy. So, but the Nordic countries, they have capitalist features and they also have socialist features, if you will, right? So that's and it works pretty well. I mean, at the end of the day, what you want, I believe, it's not so much to have an ideological debate. I mean, that is, I guess that gets you like YouTube views, but that's not really what people should be after. I believe personally, I mean, that people should be after what is best for people, what is best for governance of people, what is best for society. And, extreme income inequality is not good. Totalitarianism is not good. And there's a lot of stuff in between. If you can have like a competitive economy with good production of things, with highly educated people, and you can also have services that serve the community and not just the individual, I think that's usually what works the best for people. I mean, what's really the something that is weird about this relatively modern highly conservative ideology is that so the state shouldn't really intervene. But when you think about it, I mean, the whole point of having a state is to intervene, right? The military is not something that private entities are going to develop by themselves, at least not a military that actually serves the people, right? In the same way, I mean, it serves the community a lot better to have a public health system that actually serves the community than to have a profit-driven system of private, interests that will only serve some people and that will charge as much money as they want. I mean, it's just not a very efficient system. Some things are better served by something that actually comes from the state and serves the public, like post offices as well. There's a number of things. It shouldn't really, in my opinion, it shouldn't really be like an ideological debate about, like big states, small state. It's really about what serves the people.
No, I can't argue with that. Because, what's for example, the origin of a government is basically a community saying, let's do this thing collectively because that's the best approach to solving this. Like, for example, the annual flooding of a river. You can't solve that on an individual basis. You have to do that collectively as and you just scale that up, and that's government. But then there starts this kind of alienation or between the people and their government. Then you start to think that your government is not you. It's not is separate from you, the people, because of scale, because the population is so big, and so that idea that government programs are really basically an extension of a collective action by the community. And so there's a need maybe somehow to reconnect that. And then when we do reconnect that properly, then we will also probably figure out that these programs, we don't really need it. That really serves no purpose. And I don't know which congressman or which senator pushed that through.
I think I know what you're driving at. At what point in the past was that connected?
I don't know. I have no idea when it was, but I think there's a lot more connection in the past than now,
Well, I think you're making a good point, Ro. Let me just I want to point something out that maybe will help you answer that question. So if you look at those governments that we're talking about, the Nordic governments, people have quite a bit of trust in their government, and perhaps that's why they're okay with the government taking those steps to provide those services for them, and they're okay with essentially paying taxes, I guess, to fund those programs, because they know that the government is trying to do the best for its people. But if you have, on the other hand, if you have a population that does not trust its government, maybe it's a little bit harder to make that leap, right? To make that leap that, okay, my government is not just this bad thing. My government is actually trying to provide a better quality of life for all of us, because it's part of the community. And you know, in the United States, I was watching this video the other day. Before the Vietnam War period, so the 70s and the 60s,
Right.
that was really when there was a transition between a population that trusted its government to a population that distrusts its government. And that was, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but that's when conservatism, so the modern American conservative ideology really came into the public, the public sphere in a prominent way, with Nixon, Goldwater, and then Nixon, and then finally Reagan. So I don't know if that was a coincidence, but that's when people started distrusting the government. So maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah. And it would be nice to be in a place where people trust the government, and the government deserve to be trusted. And chicken or egg problem, I don't know. Where do you start with that?
And maybe that's something that you need for UBI. I don't know. Maybe that's the requisites.
I think that's I think that's a indispensable prerequisite. I don't think you can have a UBI going if not a lot of people really believe in it, or are willing to give it a chance. And otherwise, it'll just be a point for inciting either for or against. It'll just be another us versus them talking point. Something as a
absolutely,
revolutionary as that, or maybe not revolutionary, but just something so new, just a totally new idea to approach the government.
Anyways, we anything else you guys want to talk about UBI, or any final thoughts?
Yeah. No, the only thing I can think of is that we'll sit and watch and see what the information age, the artificial intelligence age, brings about, and whether it makes it inevitable or something that we really have to look into.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the discussion, guys. I thought it was an interesting discussion. It's a good time. Maybe we can talk about can have one discussion about work, and maybe read In Praise of Idleness by Bertrand Russell. I discussed it with Vladimir before, like the possibility of maybe having a meeting about that. I think that could be interesting. I don't know if you guys have read that.
No, I haven't read it, but I know about it. And I think it's Socrates or Plato said something about that as well.
Okay.
Yeah. The idea of work is interesting. So I mean, sometimes the line between work and leisure can be a little blurry, because even when we're not working, we still do things to challenge ourselves, right? So yeah, I guess like often we think work is for money, whereas leisure is not.
Mhm.
But when we're not working, we still often end up finding ways to challenge ourselves, right? So the main thing with work is that it's not challenging us in the way we want it to. That's often why people don't like work. They want to be challenged by, I don't know, making music or doing something more creative, and they're forced to be challenged in a way that they don't like. So I think that will be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, we certainly have this idea that work is unpleasant, and it's a pretty like deeply ingrained idea. And I wonder if that's inevitable with work or not.
Or maybe we should also wonder if it's universal, because I certainly met some people who, on the one hand, they don't love their jobs, but they don't hate it. They say, oh, it's fine. You know, it's just people come in all sorts of, you know, come in all sorts. There's some who I guess are harder to please or easier to please. There's a lower level of irritability, or I mean, just aren't there just people who are naturally happy, right? You know?
Yeah, I'm also kind of interested in like the nature of work. Like,
Mhm.
you know, we used to be hunter gatherers, then farmers. Now, a lot of people work on computers. Not everybody, you know, but there's still, you know, farmers, waiters, waitresses. But yeah, just the nature of work and how that's changed and what
Right.
that means for a society.
And
Yeah.
how we see work as well. One thing that I learned recently and that I thought it was very interesting is that, for example, career was not a word that people used. I mean, that's something that it was a word that it actually it was it was a word that was used for horses, not people. So so it got applied to people. You know, all of a sudden it wasn't just horses; it was also people. So like the ideas that people had about work were very different before, and they kind of start changing, especially with the industrial revolution. That kind of like changed the whole notion of work. Also
Right.
the idea that you have wages, also industrial revolution. The idea that you have 8-hour workday, which used to be like 16. And then it got gradually reduced. I mean, that's also came with the industrial
Yeah.
revolution. So a lot of the notions that we have about work that seem in our society, they're like absolute, right? I mean, work is this big thing, it's like an absolute concept, but it actually is not. Historically, it's not
No.
that old.
But yeah, and one interesting thing is, you know, the work week got shorter and shorter and then got stuck at 40. What up with that? Right?
Well, yeah,
Why-
that's why we need to, hey,
Why-
Bertrand Russell was saying that, we can keep going, this 8-hour,
Yeah.
day is.
Oh, you know, why did it stop at 40? You know? And not that I'm saying it's wrong or right. I'm just curious. You know, maybe that's just a natural whatever. Who knows?
That's a good question, actually. In some countries, it's a little bit shorter than that.
Yeah, France tried to put in a 35-hour work week. I don't know if they were successful or
I
not.
think they were. I think in
Yeah.
France it's 35, so it's a
Mhm.
little bit shorter.
Yeah, you know. And
Well, guys, I'm gonna hop off, but it was good
Yeah.
chatting.
Well, thanks for the conversation, guys. So yeah, next week we'll talk again. Thanks for being here and for watching.
Thanks, Bruno.
see you
Thank
guys.
you.